Yeah, welcome everybody. This is the B Culture Call that we started in 2018 with it was actually Sheridan, Howie, and I in 2018 met at Champions Retreat. Realized we didn't talk work at all, and so when we got back from New Orleans, we set up a call, and then we started kind of talking about. We realized we had a lot of the same issues as kind of the beekeeper, and not necessarily that we were like SHRM certified professionals in this, but now we own all these responsibilities and hats. So we decided to see who else was in the similar situation, and out of that came the B Culture Call. So we've been running this thing for, I guess, 2.5, 3 years almost now. And what was it, late last year? I brought Christina on. Well, Christina volunteered. I didn't have to volunteer her. She volunteered graciously to help me kind of stay organized. Everybody who, if you get to know me, you'll know that I am fantastic with details and the minutia of things, and that's sarcasm. And so Christina has kept me on the rails and is now kind of my co-host and my co-pilot on this. So that's the B Culture Call. We're grateful today to have Myers-Briggs here with us. And Dr. Marta Coons, did I pronounce that last name right?
You did.
Nailed it. I'm quitting for the week. But yeah, just wanted to give a quick brief overview. If anybody does want to be added to this call, we had this call running before B Lab kind of decided. They've been kind of adding new affinity groups, and they've added an HR and culture one. So there's 2 or 3 different calls or different groups within that HR and culture, and we're kind of the culture one. And then one of the big things, I analyzed the survey they sent out, and one of the big things that came back was kind of the new normal and returning to work, and we're going to be hybrid, we're going to be remote, and making sure, and we have gone through some of this internally at Ad Victoriam where I work, of how do you manage that, how do you manage the differences? Some people are in the office, some people aren't. Some people are in the office full-time, some are in, like me, 1 day a week, and it boils down to communication. And that was one of the reasons we started playing this call, I think, in January. So that's what we're here today to discuss. And just real quick, yeah, I probably should have introduced myself first. Nathan Stuck, Director of Corporate Culture and Strategic Impact at Ad Victoriam Solutions. If you use Salesforce, you ever need Salesforce help, I'm not going to touch the technology, but we have a really brilliant team that will. And I also started and run Be Local Georgia and a bunch of other things. So that's me. And then Christina, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll hand it off? Oh, you're on mute.
That's my second time today. Like, you think after 1.5 years, I'd have it down. I'm Christina Ola. I work with Dialogue Direct. I'm the Director of Community there. Ultimately, what we do is face-to-face fundraising. So we work on behalf of international nonprofits, or we also work on behalf of B Corps to really help their story and their cause grow. And just ultimately with the B Culture Call, just want to thank you all for being here, for Nathan for leading it, for Dr. Marta Coons for being here as well. I think it's such a great space where we find camaraderie. And like Nathan said, kind of share our challenges, our struggles, but also walk away with knowledge and confidence to bring that back to our teams, improve our companies, and then really contribute even more so back to the B Corp community and strengthening us that way. So thanks all for being here, and we'll pass it on.
Beautiful. All righty. Thank you. Thank you. Jen, do you have, why is my screen? Oh, there we go. Never mind. We're good. All righty. So here I am. You can all see my smiling face, so no picture on the screen, but I do work for the Myers-Briggs Company as a senior consultant and certification faculty for all of our different assessments. Today, we're going to focus a little bit on the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the Mbti, just as a way for us to think about communication, how to make our communication clearer when we're working with other people, whether it be virtually or face-to-face. Noticing a couple people are putting links to their LinkedIn profile in chat. Feel free to do that as a way to keep connected. So seeing 2 or 3 in there already. So if you can, scroll back in on the chat and follow those links and keep that connection going, definitely a great way to communicate. So nice modeling of that. So what do you need to know about me? Yeah, my PhD is in depth psychology, which is a really cool study, basically psychology of the unconscious mind. So kind of like that. And I am a professional certified coach. So definitely bring that coaching lens to the work I do with assessments. So here's what we're going to be doing for the next, I don't know, half hour or so. We're going to be talking about facilitating two-way communication. And in particular, we're going to bring the lens of the MBTI preference pairs. So we're not officially taking the MBTI, but I do want to talk a little bit about these preference pairs. Now, when we look at the preference pairs, some of them you're going to recognize yourself, or you're going to recognize somebody else and you'll be like, oh, yep, I got it. That's me. Or I've seen that before. Others of them, you might be like, I'm not really sure about this. That's totally okay. If you ever want to take the MBTI, we can make that happen. But it's a great lens to think about. Even if you don't know someone's preferences, it can really be a helpful thing to think about. Well, I tried it this way. That didn't work. Let me try it this way. Alrighty. So when we look at the MBTI preference pairs, we're looking at pairs of opposites, right? And these 4 pairs of opposites can be really helpful in communication. Right? Our first pair of opposites is extraversion and introversion. And these are the opposite ways we direct and receive energy. How are we energized? How do we prefer to engage? Inner world or outer world? We look at our opposite ways to take in information. We all take in information. How do we prefer to do it? Sensing or intuition, 2 different ways. Now, if you have questions, feel free to put them into chat. We're juggling a fair number of people, so putting voices out there might be talking over each other. But if you put it in chat and then want to put your voice out there, you can unmute yourself. Some of the questions we'll answer right away, or I'll answer right away because they pertain to what we're doing. Others we might hold on to, right? So if the question is put in chat, we will get to it, sometimes in the moment, sometimes at the end. So feel free to put it in there, and we'll get your voice heard that way. Thinking and feeling are opposite ways to decide and come to conclusions, and our judging and perceiving preferences are opposite ways to approach the outside world. 4 preferences. And the idea is that we all have these preferences. We all have a preference for one or the other. Now, here's the thing, though. For all of these opposites, for all of these preferences, we do both, right? 2 hands, right? I'm left-handed. I prefer to write with my left hand. I can put my right hand, I don't walk around all day with my right hand tied behind my back. I use both hands every day. But if you give me a choice, I'm going to use that left hand, right? That's what our preference pairs are like. We use both every day, but which one do you like best? Which one is most natural to you? That's what we're looking at with these preference pairs. Now, learning to use the other one is really important, right? So I have a preference for introversion, right? That's my preference. But I use extroversion every day. I engage with the outside world every day. And the more I practice using that other one, the more I almost get to be ambidextrous, right? I get to use both. Now, my favorite is always going to be my favorite, and it's always going to take more energy to use that other one. But I can learn to use both. And that's actually our goal, is to learn to use both when it's appropriate. The other thing to know about psychological type, personality type, the MBTI, these 4 preference pairs, is that it's about mental energy, not behavior, right? You can't always tell someone's preferences by looking at them from the outside. Sometimes they behave in ways that is true to their type preferences. At other times, they're like, oh, no, putting the work hat on, so here's what you see. Right? So you don't want to look at somebody and say, oh, I can tell what your preferences are just by looking at you. Not always the case, right? When I'm doing my trainings, very often halfway through, someone will say, oh, you must have these preferences. It's like, actually, I don't. I'm flexing a little bit, right? I'm practicing the other ones because it's more appropriate to the task, right? So an important thing to remember, that don't judge a book by its cover really applies here. So let's look at these preference pairs and explain them a little bit. Let me share a story that I have for each one. Sometimes I share some stories and people are like, oh, I get it. Yep, that's me. And then we're going to take a look at how these preferences maybe apply to communication. So first one we're going to look at is extraversion and introversion. So what do we know about extraversion? With extraversion, let's see if this will, where'd my little thing go? There it went. People with a preference for extroversion tend to be energized by interacting with other people, right? They're engaged by the outer world. And so they're interacting with other people. They work ideas out by talking them through. They want to talk to other people, right? Don't just send them a text message. You want to talk to them. Face-to-face is ideal. Folks with a preference for extroversion probably had a tough time this year, right? Past year and a half, there hasn't been a lot of opportunities to engage with the outer world. And so sometimes people get quite creative about that. So this is our preference for extroversion. They're going to learn best by doing, by discussing. They want to be engaged, right? Nathan's thinking, oh, who do I know like this? Thinking maybe you know the answer to that one, huh? Yeah. So extroversion says, I like the outer world. It's my favorite world. I want to engage with people. I want to be active in that outer world. This is a direct opposite to introversion. Introversion says, no, no, no. I like that inner world. I want to reflect on my ideas and experiences. I don't necessarily want to talk them through with you. I want to go inward. I'm going to work my ideas out by thinking them through on the inside. Right. So I might not seem like I'm engaged because things are going on the inside, but it's just that you just said something. And now I'm like, I wonder about that. And I'm thinking it through, not necessarily showing you that I'm thinking it through. Right. Introversion says, I like to reflect. Give me something to chew on. And now I'm going to go away and chew on it for a while. Right. I need time to process. The folks with a preference for introversion, there are perkers. Right. They perk on things. Right. They need to process it internally. Now, we all use extroversion, we all use introversion, but chances are one of them is your favorite. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes we develop a skill in that other one, right? So I have a preference for introversion, but I know how to use extroversion. I've had a lot of practice at it. And when that's the case, it can be really hard, even for ourselves, to determine which our preference is. It's not always an easy, oh, extroversion, introversion, that one's me. Right? Sometimes it takes some time, it takes some processing it through with somebody else to really get to, oh, this is what my preference is, and this is what my skill is. So that's our first preference pair, extroversion, introversion. I think of extroversion, introversion, I think of going to a party. Right? And very often when I'm working with a group, I'll talk about extroversion and introversion, and I'll break people into two groups. Those with the preference for extroversion in one group, those with the preference for introversion in another group. And I say, hey, tell me about your favorite elements of a party. And everyone with a preference for extroversion, they write up their list and like, oh, parties, we love parties. We get to meet people. I get to see old friends. I get to meet new people, lots of people there. There's music, there's dancing, there's connecting. It's really great. I'm talking to everyone. I'm the last one to leave. It is so much fun. And folks with a preference for introversion, their conversation starts, well, if I have to go to the party, I want to find one or two people that I know really well and sit down and have an in-depth conversation with them. My favorite part is actually leaving early, right? Sometimes I've had people will say, yep, the host called me up and say, did you already leave my party? It's like, yep, already home, snuggled in, watching TV, right? People with a preference for introversion don't necessarily love gathering with large amounts of people. Now, it doesn't mean that they're shy. They're just more selective, right? So if you have a small gathering of 4 people that they really love to talk to, they'll stay all night. Or if you give them an opportunity to talk about something they're really interested in, they love that, right? So it's more about selectivity, not about being shy. But there is a difference between extroversion and introversion. Which world do you prefer to engage with? Now, if we look at that through the lens of communication, there's some strengths that each preference brings to the table. Folks with a preference for extroversion, they think out loud. They know what's going on. You know what's going on by listening to them. You can hear their thought process, right? They tend to respond rapidly. It's like talking, talking, talking. They ask lots of questions in the moment. They're just engaged with the conversation. You can tell right away that they're interested and intrigued, and they're thinking it out with you. Folks with a preference for introversion have different strengths. They tend to work things through inside, right? They're going to wait for those opportunities to speak. They're not going to talk over you. They're going to have that going on internally, and they're going to share their ideas when they're really well thought out. I think of extroversion and introversion as baking cookies. Folks with a preference for extroversion, they figure out if the cookies are done by taking them out of the oven. They done yet? Nope, put them back in. They done yet? Nope, put them back in. And that's what they do with their ideas. Folks with a preference for extroversion say something, then say, let's bring that back in. And they say something, it's like, oh, that's half-baked, not done yet. So you have to give them that time to process. Folks with a preference for introversion, you're not sure, and then all of a sudden they share this idea that's like, wow, that's an amazing idea, because they thought it through, right? So we each have our strengths. This is about strengths. Which strength do you have? I always say when we look at the MBTI preferences, it's like, they're both good. Which good are you? Right? It's a positive model. So how do we encourage dialogue? How do we facilitate this two-way dialogue? Well, if I'm talking with someone who has a preference for extroversion, I need to use my extroversion a little bit. I need to flex into that a little. So they want immediate feedback. They want acknowledgement. They don't want you to just sit there and go internally and process through. You need to say to them, hey, this is what we're talking about. Oh yeah, I heard your idea. Let me think about that for a few minutes. Wow, I think that's really interesting. I just need to process it a bit. Right? Yeah, definitely an emphasis on positivity. There's no right or wrong profile. There's 16 possible combinations and they're all good. There's not one combination that's better than another. Someone has that preference for extroversion, talk to them, right? Don't send them an email. They're going to be better if you can talk to them person to person. Now, that's been tough this year. We can't, get literally face to face, but that's why we're Zooming, right? That's why we're even connecting voice to voice. That's really going to work with someone with that preference for extroversion, right? And remember, people with that preference for extroversion, they take the cookies out of the oven. They talk out loud. So take everything they say with a grain of salt as they're processing through. Don't jump on them and say, wow, that's a horrible idea. No. Just sit back, let them process through, put those things out there until they sort of have their idea fully formed. Right? So there's definitely things we can do. Now, you might not know someone that has a preference for extroversion. You may, right? But this just gives us an idea about different ways that we can communicate. Someone has a preference for introversion, give them that space to talk, right? Give them, sometimes they'll be processing it through and you have a preference for extroversion, like, but I jump in and I interrupt. It's like, hold on, bite your tongue a little bit, no finger in your mouth. Let them fully say what they're going to say. Right? Find a time and a place to communicate with them where it's not like everyone's all over the place. There's kids running around in the background if you're Zoom calling, right? Things on the outside can be very distracting to them. So try and find a time and a place where there's not a lot of busyness. That'll help with that conversation. Right? And that providing information ahead of time, really, really important. Remember I said how they like to perk on things? If you can give them information ahead of time and say, hey, we've got a meeting coming up and we're going to be talking about X, Y, and Z. Now they know. Now they can start thinking about it. So when we have this conversation, they're like, oh, okay, now I'm ready to talk. Right? The other thing to do is say, hey, we just had this meeting looking for ideas. And now we say, okay, give me a call by tomorrow and follow up with any thoughts you have on what we just talked about. Right? That time to process either before or after can be really important. Now, again, we don't necessarily know each other's preferences. Some of these you can look at this and say, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. But sometimes you might be like, well, that's me, but that one on the other side is kind of me too, right? Totally fine. We're not looking for 100% on one side or the other because, again, ideally we do both. We're just trying to figure out, oh, which one is our favorite one, but when do I use that other side because it's appropriate to the task is what we usually say. It's the right time and place to use that other side. Alrighty. Let's move on to sensing and intuition. This is all about how do we prefer to take in information? We all take in information. How do we prefer to do it? Sensing says, I like to take in information through my senses. Simple. What I see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. I see this, I hear that, right? Exactly what's happening in the moment. Focus on what's real and tangible. They're not imagining, they're not looking at something that's not concrete and specific. It's right here in front of me. Oh, this is a rose. Oh, this is what it smells like. Very specific, very detailed, right? Details and specifics. They notice how many petals are on the flower. They notice, oh, there's a thorn here and a thorn here. They're paying attention to what's here right now. Right? That's one way to take in information through our senses. We all know people who do that, who are really good at noticing all these details and the specifics. It might even be you. I tell you, it's not me, because this is me. I'm this preference for intuition. Right? I take in information by seeing the big picture. And because I'm looking at the big picture, all those little details, I don't necessarily see them. They're important, but it's just not what I tend to focus on. Right? I focus on connections. Ooh, this is like this. This is like this. Ooh, this might go to here. Right? Intuition is really about imagination and seeing new possibilities. Right? Oh, it could be like this. It's like it could be here. Oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this. Right? It's a very different way of taking in information. It's very future oriented. It could be this, or it's a possibility. Where sensing says, this is what it is right now. Intuition says, yeah, but this is what it could be. Right? Those are both so important. Right? It's really important to know what's in the here and the now, but it's also really important to know, ooh, maybe it could be like this, and to look forward. Just different ways of taking in information. Sometimes in training, I will, again, break people up by, do you think you have a preference for sensing? Do you think you have a preference for intuition? And then I give each group a bag of M&Ms. But it's not in the M&M bag that it comes in. I have to pour it into a clear Ziploc bag. And folks with a preference for sensing, they're like, oh, we have a clear Ziploc bag. I ask them to describe what they've been given. Clear Ziploc bag, gray slider on the top with a little pink tab, says Ziploc on the front in white lettering. The bag is about, I don't know, 3.5 by 4.5. Inside, there are these round things that look like candies. They have a white M on them. There's green ones and blue ones and brown ones and yellow ones and red ones. There's one that looks like it's broken open and I can see what looks like chocolate in there. There looks like there's more blue than green. Details, details. The other thing folks with a preference for sensing are really good at is remembering details, remembering specifics. Oh, I remember my grandmother made cookies with these. I remember there's an M&M store in New York, right? Because that's when they used sensing before. They saw that before, they heard that before. Details, details, specifics. Now, if they open the bag and taste one, oh, it tastes sweet. Oh, it's crunchy, right? They might move the bag and say, oh, it makes noise. But details, what's actually happening in that bag of M&Ms. Folks with a preference for intuition, if you didn't write down what the task was, like what they were doing, you might look at the list they came up with and have no idea what they're talking about. Right? They see the M&Ms and they're like, oh, hey, did you see that documentary where the people who pick the cacao beans have never tasted chocolate? What would that be like to have never tasted chocolate? I like chocolate. What kind of chocolate do you like? Hey, do you think the people who pick coffee beans have ever tasted coffee? What country is that in? Hey, if you could go to any country, what country would you go to? Do you think it'd be fun to go to that country? Maybe we could all plan a trip to this country. What would it be like if we all went there? It's like popcorn, like bing, 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 bing. It's connected, but it's not usually, a detail. They might say things like, oh, it's really good for doing math. Oh, you could use that for potty training. You can use M&Ms. They go through all these things. And again, you could look at their entire conversation and have no idea what they're talking about. Could be basically anything. That's intuition, but it's really important. Doesn't resonate at all with you, huh, Nathan? Thinking maybe somebody might have a preference for intuition. Right? We all know those people who, and I'm one of them, we're all over the place. We never tell somebody what something is. We tell them, well, it's like this. It's as if you did this. And people with preference for sensing are always saying to me, don't tell me what it's like. Tell me what it is. That's hard work for me because I'm imagining possibilities all the time. Right? Just two different ways to take in information. Again, we use both every day. I can use sensing when it's important to do that. But if I don't focus on doing it, I'm imagining and wandering all over the place because that's what intuition does. It brings in possibilities. Right? Now you can imagine in communication, sensing and intuition are very different. Right? If we see someone who has a preference for sensing, they want facts, they want details, they want concrete examples. Give them information, the more the better. Right? They want it clean, practical, plain language. They're really good at focusing on the here and now. When they communicate with you, you know exactly what they're talking about. They're saying it in a very precise way, and it's real. It's happening right now. That's a strength for them. Someone with that preference for intuition, they have different strengths. They like to brainstorm or play with ideas. They're really good at imagining things, imagining possibilities. They're very future thinking. Right? So if you're looking to someone to strategically plan 10 years out, someone with a preference for intuition, they're really good at that. They're really good at symbolism and metaphors, right? And helping sometimes to paint the picture for people, right? Each preference brings a strength to the conversation. Now, how do we have these conversations with people with different preferences? Well, someone has a preference for sensing, be practical, right? Find ways to bring things down to earth. So even if you're thinking of a big picture idea, what are the concrete specific things? What are the practicalities you can bring to the conversation? Immediate application, really important for someone with that preference for sensing. So don't just tell them, wow, we could go here and here and here. No. What's the return on investment going to be next month? Oh, okay. Now I can grab onto that. Right? Give them sequence, give them details, give them a 1, 2, 3 list, right? And not just well, it might be this. No. Give me some details that really pertain to what we're talking about. That's how I can have a conversation, have dialogue with someone with a preference for sensing. Now, again, for me, I have that preference for intuition, so that's not necessarily my strength. I have to flex into that. I have to practice that and be very focused on doing that. Someone has a preference for intuition, right? Be open to those possibilities, because sometimes they'll put out this idea like, oh, we could do this and this and this, and you hear it and you think, excuse me? Like, no, that's not possible at all. Okay, let's just breathe for a minute, because very often somewhere in what they just put out there is a possibility that we could actually focus on. Give them as little details as possible, just an overview, just a thumbnail. Too much detail is going to just take them right out of the conversation. They're no longer listening. You have this list of 10 things. By the time you get to 3, their eyes are glazed over, they're daydreaming. It's just too much detail for them. And always be willing to brainstorm. Give them an opportunity to come up with new ideas. That's where they excel. And so if you come to them and say, nope, this is what we decided, this is what we're doing, it's a dialogue stopper for them. But if you say to them, well, we're thinking about this, what other ideas do you have? Wow, now they're engaged, right? And very often they can still come around to that idea you've already came up with. They just want an opportunity to look at the possibilities. So very different ways of taking information, which really flavor how we might communicate with someone with one preference or the other. All right, those are 2 of our preference pairs. Let's move on to our third one, which is how we prefer to make decisions, thinking and feeling. And the thing to remember about this, feeling isn't about being emotional. It's about making decisions based on people, based on values. I always call this one the hokey pokey preference pair. Someone has a preference for thinking, they take their whole self out. Someone has a preference for feeling, they put their whole self in. Right? How do they make decisions? So someone with a preference for thinking, they make decisions based on logic. They step back and say, logically, what should I do in this situation? Right? They step back, they're objective when they make decisions. And they step back and say, well, here are the pros, here are the cons, this is what we should do. Very logically analyzing what's happening. Someone with a preference for feeling, right? They make decisions based on personal input, on people, on values, right? Whether it be the values they hold or the values they hold for the group. Christina, glad the analogies are helping. I tend to do that with stories just to sort of paint the picture a little bit for people. Thanks. Alrighty. They step in, again, hokey pokey preference pair here. They're going to step into the situation and not just say, oh, there's 5 people I'm making a decision about. They're stepping in and saying, oh, wait a minute. I'm making a decision and it involves Nathan and Christina and Jen. Each of them have a different story, right? It's not all the same, right? So I have to take into account everyone's individual needs, right? And the values I hold for each of them. Then I can make a decision. That's the difference here with thinking and feeling. They're all about very often harmony. Now, sometimes it's inner harmony. Am I making decisions that are in line with my values? Sometimes it's outer harmony. Am I making decisions that create harmony for this group? Either way, here's this focus on people, not the objectivity, but the subjectivity. I know what my dominant sides are, but I can see myself in both sides, especially when I'm working with different people and know how they work best. Yeah, and that's it exactly. That's what we call flexing. Like, this is what I prefer, but if I'm working with this person, then I need to do things this way. If I'm working with this person, then it makes more sense to do that, right? That's that appropriate use of type that we're looking for. So when I think of thinking and feeling, I look at my choice of an airline. Now, before the last year and a half, I used to travel 3 weeks a month, and I was always on an airplane. And I have a preference for feeling. So I make my decisions based on values. Now, I have one particular airline I fly all the time because they're in line with my values. And not just because, they've got a slogan that says, oh, we're kind to people. No, 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 because kindness is one of my core values. It's because I have seen them do things for people I know, just watching them at the airport, like just how their customer service, they really take care of people. They value kindness. And so because of that, they're my airline. So when I fly, I don't go look at like Travelocity or Kayak or Orbit or any of those different websites. I go to their website and I look at what flights they have available. And I choose the one that's got the, maybe the lowest price or the shortest travel time, right? So I still use some of that logic once I get there, but I just go to their website to choose which airline I'm flying, right? Because they're the airline I believe in. Someone with a preference for thinking would look at all the airlines and say, well, let's see, which one's got the shortest travel time, which one's got the best prices, right? They would step back and use that objectivity. I'm much more subjective. And I've gotten to airports and gotten in my rental car and driven for 45 minutes and said, oh, there's another airport I could have flown into if I had traveled another airline. But I don't, because I make my decisions with feeling based on values. There's that difference between thinking and feeling in our decisions making. All righty, so let's look at strengths here. If we have someone with a preference for thinking, right? They want information that's presented objectively, and they're really good at doing that. That's their strength. They can step back and say objectively, here's this, this, and this, right? They're really about competence and expertise, and they display competence and expertise. That's an important factor for them. Yeah, now if only I get Delta to become a B Corp. Well, Nathan, you work on that. I wonder if any of the airlines are B Corps. I don't know about that. Not my area of expertise. That's something for us to work on. I like it. Focus goals for look. There you go. We like it. We got some goals going. Preference for thinking, really good at focusing on the goal, at getting tasks completed, right? They're all about the task, focusing on the task. Preference for feeling, they're really good at providing encouragement, positive feedback, because that's what really works for them. They want to collaborate. They want to cooperate. They're going to do whatever they can to work with you. And they're interested in people. They're really focused on the individual in each situation. That's a strength they bring to communication. So how do we communicate with someone who has a preference for thinking or someone who has a preference for feeling? If I'm communicating with someone that have a preference for thinking, I want to try to be objective, right? Sometimes I have a preference for feeling. I'll get really passionate about the things I value. And I have to remember, okay, slow down, try and be objective here, show my competence, show that I do know my stuff, right? Because sometimes when I get passionate about something, I'll just jump in and I'm focused in one area. I've got to step back and say, no, no, no. Here, let me calmly explain to you what I'm talking about, right? Give them the logical reasoning and clear thinking. Not just, this is what I think. No, no, no. Here's why I think that way, right? Start to focus on the tasks and objectives. So with me, I have a preference for feeling. I focus on individuals. Well, this is what Jen needs. This is what Nathan needs. This is what's going to be best for Christina. I have to say, okay, wait a minute. This is what's going to be best for getting this task done, right? So bringing that focus in on the task will help people with that preference for thinking have that conversation with you. If I'm having a conversation with someone who has a preference for feeling, I want to take some time to connect with them. It's going to be really important that I get to know them. I know what's important to them. I know what their values are. I ask them about that because then I can bring that into the conversation. It's going to be really helpful if I'm working with someone with that preference for feeling, if I focus on people, if I practice my subjectivity, if I practice stepping in. Right? Preference for feeling, I want to make that connection a priority. Right? So once I've connected with somebody and we have a relationship, then I can challenge them, right? So if Jen and I are working together and she knows me, when I say to her, wait, I'm not really sure about this. Can we revisit it? Okay, now she knows I've put the relationship first. It's going to be much easier for me to challenge her, right? I'm going to continue to look for areas of agreement, not just this is where we're different, but this is where we have common ground. right? Building that connection, focusing on those strengths will help us to have that conversation about our areas of disagreement, right? So based on this preference for thinking and feeling, really important in terms of how we communicate with each other. Can you determine some of these by the words people use frequently? Sometimes you can, right? So again, it's not always about behavior, right? So these preferences are about mental energy. But if someone is not flexing, if they're not practicing using the other side, sometimes you will see words that are used that reflect what their preferences are. Right. So yes, it can be a determining factor in saying, oh, that they probably have this preference. But if someone's flexing and we see that someone says, nope, I'm going to put my work hat on. I want people to sort of think I have a preference for thinking. They might not even know there's this thing called thinking or this thing called feeling, but they might just think, you know, I really should be logical in my work situation. So I'm going to really practice being logical. So they may have a preference for feeling, and they at home they're like, oh, values all the way, but at work, like, nope, I'm going to be logical because that's what my job requires. So sometimes the words can be a clue, but not always. Let's look at this last preference pair, judging and perceiving, right? How do we approach the outside world? Judging says, hey, I look around and I see decisions to be made. Let's decide this, let's decide this, let's decide this. Judging isn't a bad word. Judging just says, I like to make decisions. They make a plan and follow the plan. They work that plan, right? They have a list, they follow the list, and they check that list off. They like to be structured, they like to be organized. Here's exactly what we're going to do in this order, and each time we do a piece of it, we're going to check it off and move on to the next step. Someone with a preference for perceiving is a little bit different. They look around the world and they see opportunities to explore. They want to stay in that place of exploring. Plans, no, we don't put them in pen. They're in pencil. They're just a suggestion. It's just a maybe, right? They tend to be much more flexible and spontaneous. They want to be in the moment. They want to decide as new information comes in. So nothing's in pen, nothing's decided, everything's a suggestion because they want to be, ooh, wait a minute, we could maybe, how about this? We don't need to decide just yet. Let's wait on that. I have two daughters. They're 34 and 31 now, but back in the day when they were, I think one was in middle school, well, I think one was high school, one was college. I decided I was going to, for Christmas, take them on a mother-daughter surfing trip to California. This isn't one of my daughters, by the way. It's just a great picture. So I took them out to California, and they both have a preference for judging, and I have their permission to share that, right? You don't want to ever share someone's preferences without their permission. I have a preference for perceiving. So we get on the plane, and this was a while ago. Again, they're a little bit older now. This was pre-cell phone. We get on the plane, and my younger daughter says to me, what hotel are we staying at? Preference for judging speaking. Me, preference for perceiving. I don't really know. One of them, we'll figure it out. She's starting to sweat a little bit. She's like, okay, well, rental car, we got a rental car? Oh yeah, we got the rental car. Which rental car? I don't remember. It's on my laptop. I can figure it out when I get there, but I'm sure I'll recognize it. We get to the airport. I'm going to get our luggage. Like, oh, that's our rental car company. And this was before all the rental cars were together. We get on the shuttle. We go to the rental car place. We get back on the shuttle and go back to the airport because I got it wrong. I figured it out by the second time. We had a great trip. Now my daughter, who now is 31 and is an event planner for a living, preference for judging, we plan a vacation and she says, Mom, this is going to be great. Give me your credit card. She takes the credit card. She plans everything out because that's her strength, right? Is that planning, is deciding. Where Mom like, well, we don't have to pay for it just yet. We may decide to do something else, right? Differences between judging and perceiving. What does judging bring to the table? They decide, they come to a decision, they provide closure. They're organized, they're effective. They like to have structure and they provide structure and scheduling. Someone with that preference for perceiving, what do they bring? They bring flexibility. They bring that reminder, says, wait, let's get more information. Right? They're spontaneous. They're much more relaxed in their communication. They're really good at asking questions and providing new options. Well, wait, we could do this. What about this? Right? They want to stay in that place of flexibility. So how do we communicate with them? So I'm working with someone with a preference for judging. I got to follow a plan, right? I'm going to give them a schedule and try and follow that schedule. I'm going to share things structured, organized, checklist way, right? Make the plan, work the plan. That really works for someone with a preference for judging. So I don't want to be like, wait, let's change things up. No, really stressful. Follow the plan, right? If I'm working with someone with a preference for perceiving, that's when I want to bring in that flexibility. Give them lots of options. Ooh, look, there's this, there's this, there's this. Don't expect them to decide until they've had the chance to explore all those options. Give them that time to explore before they have to decide, right? And when things come up, they come to you at the last minute and say, I know this is due tomorrow, but I just found out about this. See if you can breathe through that and say, okay, how do we bring that opportunity into the situation, right? Sometimes you can't, but giving them that opportunity is really helpful. All righty. So that was just a brief look at those preference pairs, a little bit of a whirlwind tour, right? Nathan's telling us, funny that I plan trips like someone with a preference for judging, but I execute the plan like a preference for perceiving. And I do about 10 to 15% of the things I planned. Huh. Well, here's the deal. Like we all use judging, we all use perceiving. Sometimes we have natural preferences in addition to sort of impacts of the environment. So it would be fun to explore like which one is the preference, which one is the learned behavior. Maybe Christina could give us some insights on that. Not sure. All righty. So next steps, maybe you want to learn about the MBTI assessment and see how it might be something that can help. Let's see, if I want to put this into practice, should I start with my line managers, a small team, or C-level first? What works best? You know, that's a really good question. You know, sometimes it depends on your organization. Putting it into practice sometimes works best with the C-level first because they're the decision makers and you can create buy-in. So you start with the folks that let's give you a taste of it so you can say, oh, we should do this, right? If you've got buy-in already or you have the opportunity where you are a decision maker, at least for your small team, sometimes it can be really helpful to introduce this to your small team. And then other teams are looking around saying, wait a minute, all of a sudden you're much more effective, you're much more productive. We want to be like them. What did they do? Right? So it depends on your situation, which way you start. That's something we can help with for sure if you want to have a conversation. So options for utilizing the MBTI assessment. We do facilitated virtual team building. So you've got a team, you can't come face to face. Hey, we can do a team building thing on Zoom, no problem. That's one way of doing this. While we do face-to-face team building as well, you can do it virtually, which makes it nice and easy. You can get someone internally in your organization certified. They can become an MBTI practitioner. They can go to a 4-day certification training. They get all the materials, they get support, they understand the assessment, and then they can go ahead and work with the small teams or your C-suite or whoever's inside your organization. The other option is we have an option called the MBTI online teams, where you can work virtually with each other. So it's not facilitated by an outside expert, but it's facilitated kind of on the computer. And a lot of people like that option, and they can work online together to get this understanding of their preferences and how they interact with each other, right? So facilitated virtual team building is where we come in and do some consulting. Again, we can do that virtually. You can get someone certified, or you can engage in that online experience. And one thing to remember, you do get a 20% discount for being a B Corp. So if you did want to work with us, this is a great opportunity because you get that 20% discount that you can apply in any of these areas. Let's see, any recommendations on getting the buy-in from the C-suite? I think with the C-suite, very often it's return on investment. So you want to figure out a way to show them it's going to actually make a difference for your organization. You can look at our website and find lots of information. We have white papers that show the research, but we also have a lot of case studies where organizations that have used the assessment will say, hey, this has been our experience. So feel free to go to the website and explore that. Also feel free to connect with us and say, hey, this is my C-suite. What ideas do you have? And we'll have a conversation with you about maybe some tips that you can use. We can actually also, if you identify a decision maker or two, we can go ahead and do a complimentary feedback session with them And that way they can see the assessment and what the potential is directly. Actually certified a few years back, curious if there are any new resource options that have been made available for doing it more virtually. I really only learned it in a physical gathering setting. Yes, definitely have retrofitted things to make it virtual in the last year. And let's scroll up a little bit to see who that is speaking. Pamela. So Pamela, if we're going to send out an email that's going to give you more information, if you respond to that email and say, hey, I got certified way back when, I'd love to get some tips on how to use it virtually, we can set up a Zoom call, you and I can show you some of the resources. I can share with you some of the updated materials. So just respond to that email and we'll get you hooked up for that. Can we get the presentation? And is there a link? Whoop, people are going scrolling me down against the, and there's a link to get someone from our team certified. So when you get the email follow-up, there will be information on there about how to get someone certified. Again, if you want more details on that, feel free to reach out and say, hey, can I have a one-on-one conversation? And we can do that. And I believe Nathan did record this session. Perfect, and thanks, perfect.
I think Jen's got it recording. So Jen, don't forget to end to stop the recording before we end the meeting. I've done that before and it's a bummer.
Yep. Okay, I'll make sure to do that.
And then, Anne, how do I take the MBTI assessment? So again, we'll follow up with an email and it'll give you a link that will explore more information. And within that, there will be information on how to take the assessment. Again, feel free to reach out directly as well. If you're looking at that and saying, I don't see anything here, we'll make sure you get that information. Because if you're going to take the assessment, you want to take the one that is the actual MBTI for sure. If anyone wants a reference on MBTI from an organization who has been through it, please feel free to reach out to me. So Pamela, thank you for that offer. So anyone who's on here and wants that information, Pamela has put her email in the chat, and that's somebody that you can reach out to. All righty. So,
and one other thing I was going to jump in and add too, Marta, was I think for going back to the C-suite question is also, I would suggest taking it yourself and learning about yourself. And as you take it and as you read more, like, I mean, I know who everybody in our C-suite is based on this. And I was taking notes because it's like, if they are this is how I approach them. So as you sell them, you know, like, and there was another question, it was like, what words can I tell? And the first one I thought of was, we had somebody come in and do some training with us. And it was like, if you walk into Jeff's office and you say, I have an idea and I'm just thinking out loud here, his eyes are going to roll in the back of his head. And he glazes over and he's like, I have to listen to Nathan think out loud for the next 10 minutes. So, you know, thinking about who you're also selling it to and then kind of getting into their shoes, getting out of your comfort zone and thinking about they're going to want facts, they're going to want this, or they're the think out loud, and you help facilitate kind of that brainstorming session where by the end of it, they're like, you know what, we're going to do this, and let it be their idea. Just a couple tips that have been successful for me as I've gotten more into this world and learned how to sell things better to myself.
Yeah, you want to speak to someone else's preferences for sure. And again, if anyone's interested in taking the assessment to try it out, to learn if it's going to be a fit for your organization, feel free to reach out, because as Nathan said, it can really be a game changer when you have that understanding. Yeah. All right, I think we did questions. If there's any other questions, feel free to put them into chat. If not, I'll give I think turn it over to Nathan.
Yeah, we were going to do breakout rooms. We have 6 or 7 minutes. I know some people have had to drop. We could continue to ask questions if there are any more questions, or we could jump into breakout rooms and then leave from there. Anybody have a preference? Look at Christina's even putting the sign-up sheet in the chat because she likes details. And I just assume this call will be fine next month. We'll figure it out then. I would like to thank Marta and Jen and everybody on the MBTI team, because this was super valuable. And as many times as you go through it, I've made the analogy that it's like taking Spanish 1. And then you go through this and you do it and you kind of learn a lot, and then you expect 2 years later to be able to pick up and start taking Spanish 2. So I think it's also important to kind of reiterate that this is kind of like an ongoing, especially as the culture person, the HR person, whatever your role might be within the company, to be a student. of these types of things. It's one of the reasons we have this call, but is the more you do it and the more, it's like anything, practice makes perfect. So the more you study, the more you read, the more you do it. And even going into work and thinking, like, as you start to, and there were a couple questions in there about identifying people. You'll start to realize, I work with a really brilliant, he's a Salesforce MVP. There's like 40 in the world. And when you ask him a question, it's just silence. And like, if you're one of those extroverts, it's a learned skill to go, David,
Count to 10.
thinking. And David's going to say something brilliant, but David will also just get step back if you fill the silence. He'll just go, okay. And he'll listen and he'll smile. And then you never got anything out of David because you didn't let him process and talk. So I think starting to think as you get into this, even if you can't sell it to the C-suite and you just do it yourself, you'll develop a level of emotional intelligence that will separate you. It will make the company better, will make you a better person, a better partner, a better coworker. So that's my 2 cents, my soapbox about all of these. So.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about the MBTI. You can look at how it impacts teams, right? How it impacts leadership, how it impacts decision-making, how it impacts communication. It's not only for, it's only for conflict. No, it's for all these different areas. And you can keep revisiting it again and again and find valuable applications.
Yep. So unless everybody feel, I mean, we're 4 minutes, so I don't know the point of really going into breakout rooms to say hi and leave. I was just going to wrap it up and say thanks to Marta and thanks to everybody for joining us. And it's always fun to kind of mix up this B Culture Call. This is the least I've ever had to talk on this call. Facilitating calls, also a great way for extroverts to get out of their comfort zone and learn how to listen and prod. But yeah, next month we'll be discussing ingraining B Corp into the culture. So for any of you newer B Corps, I know Steve just left, but anybody looking to either ingraining it into the culture because you just got certified or figuring out ways to, it took us about a year to even start trying some of these things, and we just recertified again late last year. So just sharing some tips and tricks and best practices to kind of get employee buy-in, make it a group decision, not always the Nathan, Mr. B Corp guy conversation or cheering in Slack and things like that. So that'll be the topic next month. And then Christina put the link in the chat if you'd like to sign up for to be on this call regularly. And yeah, I guess with that, I'll just say everybody have a great weekend. Are there any last questions before we jump? And don't forget to stop the recording too. We did it on a podcast recording.